Okay, so this is the first time we've met.
Correct.
I just read through this, and I basically started having a panic attack. Not because of me, but because of what I'm reading. And it has nothing to do with my perception of it. I'm getting a sense of probably your upbringing.
I would like to know what you get out of it and how you... That's what's intriguing to me.
So I just want to preface with your parents. Your parents are still living.
Correct.
Your father is kind of healthy, sleep apnea, high blood pressure, diabetes, gout. I'm assuming he's morbidly obese.
Correct.
Your mother, 56. This is where I'm getting a lot of issues.
Okay.
Lap band procedure in 2005. We can just assume she's got a lot of other issues on top of that. Probably deals with depression, I would assume. Correct. I'm getting a sense that she is bipolar. Okay. The other thing is you have siblings too, and you're all kind of like trickling down a lot of this psychological issues between the two. And I don't need you to tell me I'm right or wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to tell you that I'm not surprised you're sitting in front of me. Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised you probably have obsessive compulsive disorders with eating and dieting. Mm-hmm. So, and it's not, your weight isn't a problem. You need to know that. You're like, what? That's why I have to be obsessive compulsive. Mm-hmm. No.
So what's the problem then?
The identity that you have to prove yourself to your parents by being skinny. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. And you're not. And because of that, you end up having eating disorders and you end up being morbidly obese. That's how it works. There's no way around it. So no matter what you do, it's never going to work because you'll eventually sabotage because it's so isolating. You're so removed from reality. It's almost like putting yourself in jail every time you try to, I got to match this idea of I don't have a weight problem. I don't have a weight problem. Mm-hmm. You put yourself in this jail cell. You isolate yourself from any sort of freedom. You have this kind of zealot-like approach to eating, which what do you think that sets you up to do? The moment you have something that's outside of that perfect plan, how does it feel?
I go crazy.
Up
and above and beyond.
You have so much shame and guilt, but there's so much you're like, I need the freedom, that you say, let's open up the process of thought that you go into when you start to binge. Mm-hmm. This isn't what's on your plan, but you're hungry, by the way, when you're doing it. This isn't on the plan. There's a load of guilt and shame because you've ruined everything, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's either all or nothing.
Be eating it, but you still do.
Well, the no, you shouldn't be eating it means it's bad. This is off limits. This is on your parameters of perfection. This doesn't include. It's not included, mm-hmm. And it not only that, but it's the thing you're trying to avoid. Mm-hmm. Okay, so once you eat it, you're like, "Fuck! I ruined the whole day." So the whole day is ruined. There's no reason to keep on imposing those demands anymore because mm-hmm. the whole day's ruined anyways. There's no way to start over until you sleep at nighttime and wake up.
Right.
When you hear it sounds freaking nuts, right?
Oh yeah, I've gone over that many times in my head.
Then what happens is you say, well, I might as well, number one, I got to finish this. I got to get rid of it because tomorrow it can't be around. Mm-hmm. Okay? So you're logically choosing to eat excessively now. There's a logic behind it.
Right.
You're not just impulsively eating excessively. There's logic. I have to finish it. It's got to be gone because it's too much for me to handle. I can't handle it with my restrictions. This crazy, insane restriction doesn't give any. There's no give to it. Mm-hmm. So even if I have a lick or a taste, I can't handle it because it's that in itself. A lick or a taste is just as bad as eating the entire bag. Mm-hmm. Do you hear the insanity in that view? A lick or a taste is just as bad as the entire bag. Mm-hmm. But you believe that thought process. So you finish the whole bag, and then you might as well go get everything else you've been denying yourself. So you're going to go to fast food. You're going to go to the gas station and buy gas station pastries. That's what I used to do. You used to do all this. You're doing all this stuff thinking, I'm addicted to food. Well, in reality, you're addicted to those strict rules. Those strict rules, that's your addiction. You've misplaced your addiction. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the addiction for the strict rules is a byproduct. It is a consequence of what thought? That your body sucks. Mm-hmm. And you need to fix it to feel good about yourself. And that right there came from your mom and your dad.
From my very strict Baptist parents.
Oh!
Who had extremely strict rules.
Well, if you go watch all my videos, there is a direct link between severe controlled boundaries. Religion is a very typical, you're going to have an addiction if you have religion. Strict. That doesn't have leniency.
That was the only thing I remember from my childhood is church. And,
I'm sorry.
All those wonderful things.
Yeah, have you forgiven that? Have you forgiven it yet? Like the reason your parents gravitated to that? Because remember when I said there's severe trauma in your family? I can just feel it.
I try to understand, like this last year, I've tried to understand it more, and I think maybe it makes sense why I finally came here after reading all this and listening to it, because I'm finally not trying to please my dad with everything that I do, because I was always like, I wouldn't.
Does he have any credibility at this? Does he have any credibility to you at this point in terms of knowing what is reality? Can you forgive him now, knowing that he's got something wrong? Like he's been traumatized. There's no way around it. If you're severely traumatized, did he go to Vietnam?
Yes.
Okay.
And his parents were very, very
alcoholics.
No, they were
zealots.
They were religious
zealots
too. Yeah.
Okay,
and
so someone over there was either raped. There was like some severe trauma. You don't gravitate towards that type of crazy unless you've had that type of crazy trauma.
Oh yeah, like I try to understand because my grandparents were very strict with my dad and not nice to him, so trying to understand why he was that same way.
So you can kind of forgive him.
Yeah, a lot more than I could before.
Well, you have to have that. You have to go into what would make sense for this so that I can not define him by it. What you're looking at is where things get taught and molded and sculpted that isn't necessarily true to his identity. It's true to the thought process.
Right.
You're doing the same thing to your body that your father did to you in imposing those strict demands with religion. So you can actually forgive yourself too. Like if you had a child and they looked at you, they could actually go, oh, well, based on all of this, I totally understand why she's so messed up in regards to this.
I try not to impose any of that on my children.
Well, you are. There's no way around it.
Right.
You're watering it down, but it's definitely passing down because the belief is that even if it's not by looks, healthy is what makes you a good person. And that's what they're hearing. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
Pretty messed up. I know. It's a identity with the human form. So when I'm reading this, I could feel all of that trauma. And it right from your parents. And I had you're like trying to sweep it all up under a rug. It's like they go in and go...
Because that's what you do.
And you sweep it under a rug. No, that's what you're doing. And you don't see that there's something wrong with it. You don't see that, okay, all of this you took on as if it is the reality of your life or it's defining your life. And at some point, you're going to have to, like, totally disconnect with the past. Like, complete disconnection. A lot of people, when I say that, they think, oh, that means I'm abandoning my parents. I'm abandoning or I'm angry. No. Disconnection means that you totally 100% forgive them. You don't need them to apologize. Even though they're still assholes. You totally can see, you've surpassed them consciously. So it doesn't make sense to expect them to be of higher conscious levels.
Right.
So you can just see them as special needs.
That's funny, thinking my dad has special needs.
This
great, big...
It's unfortunate.
Manly guy. Right, but you're right.
You kind of have to. That way you don't have this expectation for them to know what you needed to hear. Right. That you can actually look and go, okay, well, based on his upbringing and her upbringing, because she gravitated him for some reason, this would make sense. And why they gravitated to such stringency to the belief system that you were brought to believe in. You're no different than any other Christian zealot or other religious zealot that believes in a different system.
Right.
There's no difference. So you got to kind of and understand when you left that environment, there's a humongous sense of vulnerability to being rejected and abandoned and judged by your own parents. So the only way to not feel bad about that is for you to be like completely opposite. It's almost like angrily leaving the environment. So it's protecting you from feeling bad or sad about it. So there is some grieving that you probably haven't done. Like you said with the tattoos, you're blatant about, I want to break free. Mm-hmm. It's still being controlled by those beliefs.
Right.
Because if you didn't have that system, would you still have chosen to do that? Probably not. Mm-hmm. For some other reason. What the meaning behind your tattoos is anger and revenge and vindication, really. Mm-hmm. That's the meaning.
That makes sense.
I know. Would you really do it?
Like, how did you know this from reading that stuff on my paper? It's one of those things.
You realize that the how you're thinking is very predictable. So there's a lot of things I can make assumptions about. I may be far off on some, but I don't even care. I'm not trying to prove anything. That's why I'm like, I'm just going to say, and you can pull from it what you think is realistic, because you're the only one that really grasps the feelings that you have the moment you have them. And all I'm trying to do is say there is an explanation. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be driven by those feelings anymore if you can understand or at least have compassion for yourself. If I were to let's just go straight to where the resolution is, because you can go through your entire past with your parents, which I know immediately after reading this, you have major connections to them. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to disconnect and start over and reconnect from a totally different view. Is this helping you? I know, because you need to love them more than anything. There's some tissue if you need it. Can I tell you I did the same thing? Because I was raised, I'm not even going to name, I'm not going to say it because this isn't about the religion, it's about the stringency of the religion. A very similar religion. I totally have compassion for you, for your parents. And I went crazy. The most important thing I had to do for myself is forgive myself. Because guess what happened if I forgave myself? Then the belief systems didn't actually exist in my mind anymore. Because if I can forgive myself, do you know what that means about the beliefs and the stringency I was taught? That it's flawed. Because there's no forgiveness. Jesus is over there, right? Forgiving everybody except for me. Because I believe in that religion system. Does that make sense? So what I did, when I started kind of letting go of that belief system, there was massive trauma and guilt involved. When I actually was raped, it was way worse for me because of how isolated I was from reality. I was so closed-minded, so ignorant, and so unaware of reality that when I went into reality, little things caused a traumatic reaction in my brain. So it wasn't even the truth of reality. It was only in my head. And so I felt So what happens is you kind of are taught to splint your soul, put like scaffolding around your soul to protect it from anything that could touch it or harm it. And what happens, and what I just said to you is what happens when you do that to, let's say, your leg. Let's say you have a leg that's perfectly functioning and you put a brace around it because you're afraid it's going to break. What happens to the leg when you splint it?
It gets weak.
It gets very weak. The nervous system starts to atrophy, then the muscular system atrophies, and you end up having a very weak leg, which makes it very prone to what? Getting broken. So it's basically creating a very vulnerable environment for what you were afraid of to start with. What happens when you take your soul and you say, you know what, I'm afraid your soul is going to get traumatized. Usually when people have been traumatized, you see why they gravitate towards crazy splinting around the soul? That would be religion. Mm-hmm. Like crazy, unforgiving splinting. It's like saying, we don't trust people around you, so we're going to put you into isolation. To you, it feels like you don't trust me. But it's really not that. It's I don't trust people around you. So it actually was a gift of love that you were imposed with this type of thinking, by the way. So you can understand that as mom. Mm-hmm. They were trying to protect you, They became identified with that belief system as if it was their identity. You took it on too because you were afraid that they wouldn't love you if you didn't like the scaffolding around your soul. In the meantime, you totally lost touch with reality. It got withered away. Like, remember the leg? The soul goes away. It's still there. You just don't have the bearings of what it is or who you are and what you love and what you like. And eventually you realize that the scaffolding is making you insane. So one of the things that we do is we take on, sometimes when we leave that belief system, we seek, because we are unaware of reality of the soul, we seek a different belief system. And many times in this culture, because we do have another cult, it's the diet cult, we think that that will help us feel better about ourselves. If I lose weight, if I get thin, I'll be accepted by everybody else. I'll be loved. I'll be seen as myself. But really, what are you being seen as? You're gravitating towards a belief that being thin is what you need to be seen as. That sounds like heaven, right? And they tell you all these rules that you need to attain. They show you all these pictures of these women who are svelte. Look at me. You could be like me. That's heaven, right? Mm-hmm. So then you say, how do I do that? Here are your rules. And what you were taught is to have no leniency. And that's what you just did. So you're basically leaving one piece of scaffolding around the soul, or splinting around the soul. And you said, well, I want another splint, and I'm going to splint on myself even tighter. But now I'm identified with trying to get thin. And what happens when you do that is the consequences are very predictable. You end up having binging because there's so much guilt because you broke the rules. And then you feel, remember that whole thing I started with? You're binging because you need to eat it all. Then you're going to, okay, see, then all that happens.
Is how, like, the last few years, I've totally changed myself as a person. Like, I feel like a much better person, but I don't go to church.
Why would you?
Still, my dad doesn't talk to me.
Oh, that's his issue. You know, you just need to remember that he's lost sight of reality. If you were to die, how do you think he'd feel about it? No, really get into it. Do you think he'd have any guilt or shame?
I don't know that he'd feel that he did anything wrong. Because
I don't think you have awareness of reality with this one. No, I think that he may be doing this because if you realize if he forgives you, right, what does that do to his identity with this whole religion scaffolding? If he forgives you, what does it do to his view of it?
That he's been wrong the whole time.
You got it. So how do you think it makes him feel? He's in a weird spot, isn't he? Because there's so much love, you know, as a parent that goes with your children. But because you've been shunned, basically, what do you think's happened inside of him, and what do you think he's doing within the religion itself? It's getting worse. It's getting more judgmental. How would you like to sit in front of him right now and listen to him talk about politics? How's that sound? Sound like fun? How miserable do you think he is inside? I'm a
friend who, she's a decent amount older than me, but we are really good friends. And I've been telling her how my husband never, like, compliments me or anything, and that was something I really needed. And as we started talking, she kept saying other stuff, and it took me, like, the next day, suddenly I was like, oh my God, I have horrible daddy issues.
You figured it out. Yeah. Well, you basically are putting him in that role. It's really unfair. Can you see that? Because you just want to be equals.
And that's how he sees us. But I don't.
Okay. Well, you can change that. But it's going to feel really bizarre. Because you've never been in this type of relationship before. Is it worth trying it out? So by forgiving yourself, by looking at all those issues with your dad, you don't even have to dissect them all that much. You can just realize that, oh my gosh, it's obvious my response to that was actually a healthy response. It's a normal response. This is what happens when you have these types of rules imposed as an identity, like they hijack your identity. This is what happens. It's very normal. It's like when you put these two letters together, they make this sound. When you do that to your children, this is what ends up happening. They end up having addictions and all sorts of issues because they're judging themselves. They feel defined by it. Then they end up having these all disorders with whatever it is, whether it's sex, porn, gambling, food, dieting, cutting. Religion is another addiction, which is that's what they had. They just passed it down to you. You didn't like that addiction and then chose a different one. But a lot of those conditioning things, you're conditioned to have a father role, tell you what you have to do, and then they have to give you compliments.
Or to tell me that I'm good enough, or
they have to tell you that you're putting your husband above you, just like your father put himself above you to make him feel better about himself. So if you don't do what he says, it makes him feel like a piece of shit. Your father. So anyway, so what your father really needs is someone to just love him unconditionally, even if he doesn't love you back. You need to not care, because you really need to know that if something bad were to happen to you, do you think this game, this mind game he's playing, will matter to him? See, the problem is you've defined him by that mind game as if that mind game is real. It's a game he's playing with you. He's trying to manipulate you. And if you die, what happens to his need for that game and is like, oh shit, you realize that's what's going to happen. Haven't you done that didn't you do that as a kid ever, where you're like, where there's a friend and you're like playing angry and she basically says, I'm not your friend anymore, and you're like, oh man, but I really wasn't angry, I was just trying to get you to come over and play. That's what your dad's doing. How old is that? Like 6 years old? That was probably when he was traumatized. Mm-hmm. Okay? So he's 6 in his head. Remember what he said? He's special needs? It looks like a 6-year-old's behavior, don't you agree? If you die, what do you think is going to happen to him? This isn't just a friendship he's doing. He's trying to manipulate you it's an equal representation of how much he loves you. Mm. If he didn't love you, would he care about this? He loves you far more than you could even imagine. You are so important to his sense of worth that's how awful this is for him. That's why he's acting the way he is. All of this hate is a reflection of how much he loves you. Can you see it now?
It's twisted and seems crazy, but it makes
Yeah, but if you die, what happens to his sense of reality? It actually comes back to him. And how do you think he's going to feel? Put yourself there. Put yourself there. Watch what happens. Visibly see it. What happens to him if you die? What happens to him?
When they sent me to that boarding school a couple months later, they sent me a picture of them from their 25th wedding anniversary that I was able to have there, and he looked like he had aged 20 years in those couple
with you
months.
Being gone. Just know that all of this behavior is a reflection of how much he loves you. It's unfortunate he's identified with the religion, because the religion won't let him love you, but how he's acting is it's a representation of how much he wants you back. He's trying to manipulate you back with anger and fear and rejection. It's unfortunate, because as soon as you die, if you were to die,